All right, here is part 2 of our Neon Dynasty set review. We're going to be doing colorless cards and lands here. I guess artifacts and lands. Again, we'll do artifacts by commons, uncommons, and rares, and then sorted by mana value within all of those. First up, we've got Iron Apprentice. This is 1 mana for a 0/0 artifact creature construct. It enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it, and when it dies, if it had counters on it, you put those counters on target creature you control. Two modified creatures in one?
Our two modified creatures, one, and our good, well, I don't know if I want to call him a good friend, but our friend
Star Pupil.
Yeah, got a little bit of I would argue an upgrade here.
Sure, and it's, well, yeah, I mean, I guess Silver Quill cared about +1/+1 counters, sort of. And,
yeah, I ended up not really caring about it, I would say.
No.
But so let's recontextualize here. This is what we love doing as limited players, and recontextualize a card that maybe wasn't so good before. So 1 mana 1/1 comes in with a counter. When it dies, put its counters on things. And worth noting, this set does have some ability counters. I don't actually know if there's a way to put ability counters on things that don't naturally grant them to themselves, so I don't actually know if that will matter for this card. But mostly this is going to matter for +1/+1 counters, right? The recontextualizing of this card is the fact that artifacts matter in the set, right? Cheap artifacts matter, right? Cheap cards matter because of ninjutsu. Cheap artifacts matter so you can get a density of them on the battlefield for your cards that care about that. The fact that this plays well with modified stuff, the fact that it plays well with sacrifice stuff to some extent. I would say that this is not going to be, it's not going to be a linchpin of any of these decks, but I think it does enough small things that you're going to find spots for this card where you're going to be like, yeah, you know what, I can put other counters on this, or I have reasons to sacrifice creatures, or I really have good payoffs for things being modified. That's another thing with this card, too. I was talking about modified payoffs. This thing's just naturally modified. So let's say your modified creatures have +1/+1, or your modified creatures have an ability word. This one will naturally pick up that ability word just by virtue of having a counter on it naturally. So, yeah, this is going to be one that I would love to come back to, put that kind of bookmark in. But I think my gut tells me there's enough good things going on with this card that I think it's going to be pretty good.
Yeah, I think so. I think I would probably go like solid C here. I just do think, like, a lot of folks are throwing out, if you're watching the stream, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're listening to Alex's podcast, or on the podcast feed, I think you'll know that that we do like the Golden Egg Award or whatever, like the gluiest glue card, and this has potential. I mean, we've been gotten before by 1 mana 1/1 counters. When it dies, it puts a counter somewhere else type deal. But this seems like it does enough. All the small things that Alex is talking about. I really like cards that don't do anything particularly well, but do a lot of small things really well. Like that, again, it's not quite modality, but there is something to really like about that in Limited, especially attached to a cheap, colorless card in terms of the flexibility it's going to provide you in the draft.
Yeah, I want to give this. Maybe I'm gonna bite my tongue on this, but I'm gonna give it a optimistic C+. I would say
it's pretty optimistic IMO.
Yeah.
But I appreciate it.
I think you're gonna be probably more right than I am on this one at a C. So we'll see where Iron Apprentice lands, but I'm excited for this little guy to potentially usurp his his predecessor.
Yeah, for sure.
Next up, we've got Ninja's Kunai. This is a single mana for an equipment. It's got equip 1, and it says the equipped creature has 1 tap. Sacrifice Ninja's Kunai. Ninja's Kunai deals 3 damage to any target.
So this is interesting.
Yeah.
This is a real play on the clunky 1 mana colorless deal 3, deal 4 that we've seen before, right? A Scalding Cauldron comes to mind from Throne of Eldraine. 1 mana, pay 3 to deal 3.
Yep.
This requires a creature to be able to do it, but you're paying the 3 mana in installments, 1 to cast, 1 to equip, 1 to use the ability. So installments is nicer than 3, or a total of 4, I guess, in Cauldron's case. Needing a creature and needing that creature to tap is less nice. Being able to go face is nice. Being able to have a cheap, colorless equipment for your modified stuff is nice. An artifact that goes to the graveyard is nice. An artifact that goes to the graveyard cheaply that you can then recur is also nice. I don't think this is quite as gluey as Iron Apprentice is, and I think this probably is a little bit clunkier, and you'll come down to the fact of, like, your decks probably want, like, 0 to 1 of these, and probably never more than 1 is my guess.
Yeah, it's got you know, you're making the Cauldron comparison, which I think is apt, but it reminds me a little bit more of the Torch, Blazing Torch from original Innistrad. If you remember that card, where it was like, you know,
Do I
that card was
remember
actually,
a card from a set that came out 11 years ago, 12 years
oh,
ago?
what might help you is it was also in Zendikar, the original
There.
Zendikar.
Oh, so before, so even before Innistrad. Okay, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
There we go. There we go.
Yeah. And that card was actually pretty good in its format. It plays out a little bit better than you might think. Because what you can do is you like play this on, you know, you don't have to tap before it blocks or anything. You just put this on a creature you're playing to block with, and then you know you block the creature and you tap sack whatever it is. So this effect or this templating, like you said, it's a little bit clunky, but the installment plan is nice, and it maybe is a little bit less clunky than it reads. Also, two nice things I would say about this card. One, it's a very cheap thing for modified, right?
Yeah.
You get to modify a creature very cheaply. You also get an artifact on the battlefield very cheaply for your cards that care about that, especially the black white cards, where one of the problems with the black white cards that, you know, maybe we'll get into, or one of the kind of hoops you have to jump through is like setting up so that on curve, when you play your Naomi, you know, the black white gold card we touched on, you really want to make sure that's on curve gets its effect, gets 2/2. And having your 1 mana, like on turn 1, fulfilling half of that requirement really goes a long way. You don't have to play an artifact creature and not treat it off, right? This just sits around and does the thing. So it does a lot of really, really small things that I like. All that being said, not hugely high on the card, but I think you're going to play a copy of this card a lot of the time.
That's what I think. I think, yeah. If I would put the line at like, it's like 0.75. You're gonna play 3/4 of this card in every single deck. I'm gonna give this.
I love talking about fractional cards.
I'm gonna give this a C minus.
Yeah, I would just give it a C, but yeah, I respect C minus for sure.
All right, next up we've got, oh, that's going in the past. Next up we've got Automated Artificer. This is 2 mana for a 1/3 Artificer, artifact creature. Taps to add a colorless mana. You spend this mana only to activate an ability or cast an artifact spell. So activate any ability, right? Not activate an ability of an artifact. You can activate any ability or cast an artifact spell.
I always feel like these types of cards underperform. These like conditional 2 mana creatures that like add, for instance, their sorceries or add for a specific card type. Like the bodies end up being like a little bit too irrelevant. It's got the classic mana dork problem that I always hate. Oh, actually, no, it might not have that mana dork
because of reconfigure. Like it's a body that can then wear the reconfigure stuff.
You can reconfigure. You can sacrifice it. So maybe it does. You know, the problem I'm touching on is that often when mana dorks, you know, outstay their welcome, they turn to not cards essentially when you don't have anything to cast. But maybe this one naturally solves that problem by being an artifact in there, by being reconfigured cards in the set that you can make a real card out of that. That being said, I don't know how much I love this effect. Now, you might have a deck where you're just like flush on artifacts. Like imagine you've got like 10, right? If you've got 10 artifacts, this card probably becomes okay. But even still, think about the Unblinking Observer, I think it was called, from Midnight Hand. Even in decks with like a lot of spells, you weren't that happy about the card. You're like, all right, I guess it passes. And now that's, you know, context, apples, oranges, kind of. But I can't remember the last time I was like actively happy with this kind of like the conditional mana ramp card.
Yeah, I think being a little dubious and a little more cynical of this card is correct. That said, I think you'll play it in decks, and I think there will be some decks where you're even happy to play it. Folks are asking about Ninjutsu and Channel. Ninjutsu is definitely an activated ability. Channel, I assume, is an activated ability. So this can pay for that. So it's not just, you know, not just stuff that's on the battlefield like equip costs or whatever and reconfigure, but stuff in your hand as well. This may end up being more of a mana dork than not, and with ways to augment creatures may end up solving your mana dork problem. That said, I'm not going higher than like C minus at this point.
Yeah, I would say this is a D plus myself, and you know, could be wrong, but that's my baseline here.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
All right, next up we've got Ecologist Terrarium. This is a cool one. So 2 mana for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a basic land card. You reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle. And then it's got an ability: 2 tap, sacrifice Ecologist Terrarium, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, activate only as a sorcery.
I don't love this card.
No, me neither. It's funny. It's cool. I think it does its thing kind of clunkily. So I guess the nice thing I could say about this card is it's got kind of the same vibe as one of the, you know, the Iron Apprentice, the 1 mana 1/1 that we talked about, where it does a lot of little things that may add up into a big thing. Like I guess the absolute best case for this card is you go get a land. Maybe you're splashing, maybe you're not. I think it's easy to go to splashing when you think of this type of card, but you can just draw a land and that's fine. And then you have a way to sacrifice the terrarium for a card's worth of value. You know, there's cards in the set that say sacrifice an artifact, draw a card, and that, you know, you're turning your card into a divination essentially. I think the 2-tap ability to put a counter on something is a little bit of a buyout for if you don't have those synergies. But I can see this card, you know, being like, you know, a filler card in the deck that wants to sacrifice artifacts.
Yeah, and colorless fixing, whatever. Like it,
Yep.
You'll know when you want this. I don't think it's going to be very often. Like, you know, if you're playing, you know, that the multicolored 5-color saga, yeah, you snap a couple terrariums up. You don't have to prioritize this. Yes, the comparison being made is Traveler's Amulet, because that was 1 to cast and then 1 to pay to search up the land, so that's the 2 mana there up front. Obviously, installments there better than having to pay 2 up front here. And I do think, you know, oftentimes my gut reaction with a card like this is, well, you can't afford to do nothing on turn 2 unlimited these days. But with the increase of power of 1-drops these days, maybe you can, because you're going to play a 1-drop, and then you can afford to do nothing on turn 2 like this, and then set up future turns. But whatever.
It's funny. I thought you were going to go the opposite direction and go, you can't even afford to not do anything on turn 1 anymore.
Yeah, well, that's fair. Yeah. That's fair. Yeah.
So just big picture here. I think it's actually kind of maybe a good time to say this. My gut read on the set after seeing the full set and just all that it encompasses, I think this set's going to be pretty quick. The reason I think that is, or early, maybe not like blistering, but just the same trend we've seen in the past few years of like, you got to get on board early. There's no time for like 2 mana do nothing, and even more, a little bit more in that direction, I think, because we've got, you know, the aggressive warriors team. We've got ninjas. Like when both blue-black and red-white, like both ends of the spectrum, are trying to attack you, that doesn't bode well for decks that are trying to not attack or try to get to the late game or not be proactive, right? So I think even more than usual, maybe this card has a little bit of, you know, a little bit of a, you know, tough weight to pull, essentially.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of there's so many things in this set that incentivize you for attacking too. So my read on the set is it's going to be fast, but that's just a gut read. So I'm going to start low on this one. I'm going to give it a D. You're going to know when you want it.
Yep, I think D, know when you want it, is absolutely right.
All right, what's up next?
Next up is Papercraft Decoy, 2 mana for a 2/1 artifact creature frog. When it leaves the battlefield, you may pay 2. If you do, draw a card.
Yeah, interesting. Seems not so great to me, but yeah. I could be convinced that there are places where this card is passable.
Like, I don't think you're ever gonna care about this card as like a synergy piece. I think you're gonna. This is the kind of card where it's mid pack 2, and you go, "What? I need 2 drops." My deck is fine otherwise, but I desperately need 2 drops, and you can play this. You can play 1. You can play 2 of these. Like, this is not. But and sure, this is upside, I guess, if at some point this is a relevant play for you, and I guess it's not the worst to top deck and then chump with it and draw a card. Like, that's fine. I think this is like a D plus.
Yeah, I think it's filler in the right deck is the way I would
probably. Exactly.
Yeah, D.
Yeah,
D for me.
Okay.
All right, next up we got Brute Suit. it's a 3 mana vehicle, 4/3 with vigilance and crew 1.
Meh. I mean, I guess like the vehicles deck might need this or want this actively, but otherwise I don't. This feels pretty darn fillerish to me. I mean, what did we have? Raiders Carve was 3 mana 4/3. I think also crew 1, if I'm remembering correctly, and when it attacked, you got a land. You could find a land, right?
Yep, that's it.
And you like never played that card. You were never really happy about that, except if you were like memeing with Oxplow or something.
So I think that this card's success is largely going to hinge on how many 2 mana 3 power creatures there are. How many 2 mana things that trade profitably with this. Because if your opponent plays a 2 mana 3/1 or a 3 power creature or a death touch creature or whatever, this is kind of just a nightmare. It's just like you don't want to shove this into that thing. But if there's not a lot that trades with this thing early, and you get in 1 good attack and then trade with their 3, that's actually not so bad, especially if you have some vehicle synergies. This one's going to be more of a feel thing. I don't think, this does not strike me as a powerful card, by any means. This looks fine. One of the things about vehicles is they're kind of like werewolves in a way, where they look really good in games where your opponent stumbles, and then they're like fine or whatever in games that don't. And so like they close out games that you're already winning pretty handily, which is certainly a point towards the cards. That's actually a merit. It sounds like it's an indictment on it, but that's a good thing. Just worth noting that there are games where your opponent doesn't stumble and they're just like fine / clunky / not that great. So where that all ends up, I'm not exactly sure. The vigilance on this card is like whatever, pretty negligible. The other thing I think that helps this card is the fact that as we go on, I think we're going to see a lot of playable 1-drops. So going crew with your 1-drop on this thing is nice. When you have to crew with your 2-drop, well, then your 2-drop's not attacking. But if your 1-drop maybe generated some value or was a utility creature, then can crew this, that's kind of nice. So I guess that's where I could probably come down on this. If you've got some 1-drops, probably pretty nice. If you've got some vehicle synergies, probably pretty nice. The baseline for this card is not bad, but it's just not special.
Yeah, man, there's a lot of chat to give this card a D.
Yeah, I think I'd give it like a D+ myself.
Yeah. All right, next up we've got Network Terminal. 3 mana for an artifact. Taps add 1 mana of any color. You can pay 1 tap another untapped artifact you control. Draw a card, then discard a card. Well, if it's a fast format, there's no time for this.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you'll know when you want it, which is probably going to be almost never.
This seems like a week 5 or 6 card, Yeah.
Yeah.
You're like, well, get a little bit spicy. Put a Manolith in our deck. So Manolith, not a fantastic card. Manolith that filters you. Get a little bit better for sure, but also not super fantastic. Like in the Manolith rankings, the grand scheme of Manolith rankings, this is a decent one, but Manolith is just not a card you're looking to play very often. So we're just gonna give this a D. Yeah. Pretty much,
Yep, not that exciting.
Yep. Next up, we've got Searchlight Companion. This is 3 mana for a artifact creature drone. It's a 1/1 flyer, and when it ETBs, you get a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token. Worth noting, just like original Kamigawa, this spirit does not have flying. It's just a spirit. It's just a 1/1.
We have Brian Comer at home.
Yeah, Brian Comer at home is what this is. Yeah, so we see this a few times in the set, so just be careful when you read spirit. Spirit does not always mean flying in this set.
I think it just doesn't mean flying in this set, right?
Right, yeah. I mean, some of them have, some of the spirits have flying, but that's,
but the spirit tokens do not.
Exactly, yeah, spirit tokens, exactly. So, what do you think about, Brian Comer at home?
I think, again, this feels like I really need, I don't know, multiple artifacts from one card in your black-red deck may be interested in this. This is not a card you have to prioritize. This is not a card you're going to be particularly excited about. You'll know when you want to play it. It will be serviceable. This is not, maybe this card is good to bad, maybe medium to bad ninjutsu enabler because it has an ETB effect and is evasive, but it also costs 3 mana.
Yeah.
This is a playable card. We're not knocking it when we give it a D or a D+. But ask more. What's your phrase?
Ask more from your cards.
Ask more from your cards than this.
So I think it's from a design perspective, basically what they're doing here, we've seen this in the past 5-6 cards we've looked at here. It's these artifact cards. You can't cost an artifact card, especially a common too well, too aggressively, or else you end up with Renegade Freighter, and that's not a world you want to live in. So basically, they're just like, okay, well, here's some cards I can imagine players would play in their decks that have some artifact synergies, or decks that have sacrifice synergies, or have some modified synergies. But none of them are ever going to be like, oh, I gotta have this card. Now, there's going to be probably one card that we're like, this is a cut above the rest, and we realize, oh yeah, this actually works pretty well in a lot of decks, and maybe gets that golden egg ward-ish. I'm not exactly sure which card that's gonna be, and we might have even talked about it already. But just the baseline for all these common artifacts are you can filler in your decks, and then filler plus when you've got some synergies. For example, the Searchlight Companion has some amount of synergy with ninjas, right? It's an evasive creature you can pick up and has an ETB. So, and you're again, with that artifact sacrifice synergies. So that's basically how I see these kind of cards.
Yeah, I go D+ on the companion here.
Sweet. I'll go with that same grade.
All right. Next up, we've got Dramatist's Puppet. 4 mana for a 2/4 artifact creature construct. When it enters the battlefield, for each kind of counter on target permanent, put another counter on that kind on it, or remove one from it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we saw, remember that camel from Umket that did a very similar thing? I think it actually did this exact same thing.
Yeah.
The 4-3.
Yep.
And
hauler, something hauler.
Yeah, quarry hauler, I think it was called.
Yeah.
That card is merely medium or medium
and that was
minus.
fine stats. 4 mana, 4/3.
Yeah. This one's a little bit worse on stats. Can take your opponent off modified. I don't know. I don't know. This is another one that it falls in the exact same camp. I think this one's probably like more in the D- camp. Than
The problem with this in comparison to the cards we've seen before, and this is one of the reasons, or not one of the reasons, but one of the benefits of looking at cards in mana value order is once you pass 3 mana, you can't be like, this card can't make it into your deck that often. Like, you need your 4 mana spells to be impactful, whereas like the other stuff gets by as like, okay, these have potential synergies, but also are just like fine curve fillers. You're not filling your 4-drop slot.
And the thing is, as Limited has evolved, fine curve fillers just like isn't a thing you ever like. You never want a card that's a fine card curve filler. You know what I mean? Like, you never want a card just to fill the curve. That's like, you end up being like, that's a card I'm actively sad about having in my deck. You know, it's like, I want all my cards to be good because there's so many of the good ones. You just have to play less of the bad ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
I guess, chat's pointing out that this has some saga implications, right?
It's not worth a 4 mana 2/4 though.
Yeah, sure, it's a point for the card, but not so much that I would want to play it. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna give this one a D-.
I like D- on the puppet as well.
All right, next up we've got Shrine Steward. So this is a 5 mana artifact. It's a 3/2. It's a construct. When it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for an aura or a shrine card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle.
I mean, I will obviously be casting a lot of these. Like, I like shrines in formats where shrines are terrible, and I hope shrines are not terrible here.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll play this card. But this is, you know exactly where you want to play this, and this may be good with some auras. I don't have a good sense of like, oh, but and like I can't pull one out of my hat off the bat here. Maybe you can, having looked at the spoiler more in depth so far, but yeah, I'll play this. It's not good though. 5 mana 3/2 is very, very below rate.
Yeah, so I guess the thing that strikes me, with this card is you can go get a removal spell with it. Like, that's probably the most impactful thing. Going to get there is a white or a pacifism style card. There's a few blue ones that are very similar. So there's some applications there, and yeah, if you're shrining it up, I'm sure this is a fine card. I think this is like, it's weird. This is definitely a cut above the rest that we've seen, like the artifact filler. As far as power level goes, but of course, power level is relative to mana. It's also the most expensive one we've seen. So, my gut says I probably play this like ever so slightly more often than the other ones, but I still don't think it's good, and I would start like a D+.
Yeah, I think D+ or whatever. You can give it a synergy grade and bump it up a little higher, but I think I'm fine with D+ there. Lastly, we've got Thundersteel Colossus, or lastly of the commons. It's a 7 mana vehicle. It's a 7/7 with trample and haste, and it has a crew cost of 2.
Wow. It's beefy. It is a large individual.
I mean, in a way, it's like a colorless colossal dreadmaw.
Yeah,
because it costs some mana more, but it has haste.
Well, it's basically just charging Montresor, right? Just whatever.
Basically, yeah.
So I mean, for all intents and purposes, it's a 7 mana 7/7 haste. That sometimes when you crew 2, you're gonna miss lethal because that 2 power creature would have made the difference. But it's a 7 mana 7/7 haste with vehicle synergies. Is that good? It's 7 mana, so I would assume no.
Yeah.
Here's the thing, right? The decks that would be interested in this effect for the most part don't want a 7 mana card in their deck, right? So it's like cool, you got this like giant hasty thing, and maybe this ends up being like a control finisher of some sort, but I can't imagine you're building a control deck. Like, if you're building a control deck, you've got rares as your reason to be building a control deck, and you don't need to resort to common finishers, So this just like misses on too many marks essentially, in like the kind of decks it wants to go in while being 7 mana. So I'm gonna give this one a D- too.
Yeah, I just can't imagine that I'm gonna be putting I feel like I'll be putting that Mythic Saga in my deck more than this.
You will lose to this card though. It's definitely true.
Oh,
you will lose
for
this
sure.
sometimes.
But when you lose to this card, it's like probably your fault because it costs 7 mana.
Yeah, exactly.
Next up is Bronze Cudgels. This is 1 mana for an artifact equipment, 2 mana. Until end of turn, equipped creature gets +X/+O, where X is the number of times this ability is resolved this turn, and it has an equip cost of 1.
All right, so my math is not the best, Ethan, but
It says the man who can't really count for Coven.
Yeah, exactly. I turn off my own coven way more often than I would like to. But if we do some quick math here for our listeners, how does this work out? So basically, the first one, 2 mana, it gets +1. The second activation gets +3. The third activation gets +6, and then +10, and then +15. So if you're paying 6 mana into this thing, that's a lot of mana for +6.
But it's threat of activation, right? You don't even have to pump the mana into it.
But it's only on power, not toughness. Your opponent's never worried about like their creature getting losing their creature in combat, or you eating their creature in combat, right?
Yeah.
So you have to pay a lot of mana into this before it actually becomes a real thing. Again, it's a cheap modification. It's 1/1, right? That's the nicest thing I can say about it. I don't think this card's particularly good though. Would be my reaction. Like, there's gonna be it's the kind of card where you definitely have to think about it if you're the opponent. Where it's like, well, they could pump 6 mana into that's a lot of mana, right? Like, it's weird because as the person doing that, as the person paying 6 mana, you're like, oh, that's so much mana to do it. But as the person on the opposite side, you're like, oh man, they could hit me for 6. That's actually kind of a lot. So it seems scarier from the opposite side than from the person casting it. I think a lot of the time. And generally, I think when the person casting it doesn't feel good, or the person activating the ability doesn't feel good, I think that points more towards the card not being very good than it being good. So
I'm giving the first F.
I would also probably give this one an F. Yeah, I'm there too.
Yeah, this card is really bad.
All right,
next
we've got Containment Construct. So this is a 2 mana artifact creature. It's a 2/1, and it says, whenever you discard a card, you may exile that card from your graveyard. If you do, you may play that card this turn.
Channel? Okay. Channel anybody?
Channel? Yeah, there we go. There's the synergy.
I can just spend 9 mana to Rampant Growth and play my 6/5 Trampler in green?
Ethan gets the joke here, right? That's the joke, the channel. So, I mean, there's also like looting, right? There's a little bit of looting going on.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. The body is just so nothing, right? It's just so lackluster, and it dies so easily. You have to have a pretty, a pretty large number of channel cards, or cards that loot or whatever, for this card to pull its weight. Above just being a 2 mana 2/1, because that's just like not really acceptable, I would say.
I don't know. I mean, if you can loot away lands and play them, that's pretty darn good. Is cool. Like, that's really good.
But how are you looting them away? There's not that many.
I don't know. Right? People in chat are telling me that there's plenty of ways to loot in red, they say. I don't know. I haven't seen the cards yet.
I would say there are some ways. I would classify the number of ways as some ways. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It does some cool stuff. I would be willing to start this low-ish. Like, D+ probably.
Yeah, I would say this. I feel like this looks a lot closer to the decoy than I think folks are currently giving it credit for.
Chat saying 2 mana 2/1 is fine, but it's not.
No, it's not.
It's just not anymore. Like, you can't stand for that.
Voltaire and Epicure says otherwise.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm gonna start low on this, but I think that this card could certainly surprise us. This is one that I think we could play with a few times and be like, oh, this is actually pretty sweet.
Yeah, I think.
Again, and I want to address this. Chat's also saying cheap artifacts are going to matter. We're taking that into account for all of our things here, for sure. Like, we mentioned that before. That doesn't entice me into this card all that much more, essentially.
Yeah. I think I would rather, like, when I compare this to some of the commons we saw, if the threshold is I care about cheap artifacts, there's better things at common than this, more often than not. Like, you want Iron Apprentice 10 out of 10 times if that's what you care about.
Yep, that's what I would say.
All right, next up is High Speed Hoverbike. 2 mana for a 2/2 vehicle. It's got flash, flying, crew 1, and when it enters the battlefield, tap up to 1 target creature. This is a nice little cheap evasive threat.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. Not quite Smuggler's Copter. Being a 2/2 instead of a 3/3 and not looting is certainly, I've seen this being compared to Smuggler's Copter. It's not that card, but being a pseudo blocker the turn it comes down to the top, it taps down something, or you flash it in, tap down a blocker if you're attacking. Yeah, I think this is a nice little engine. No pun intended.
And 2 mana vehicles are great like 2-mana vehicles feel better than more expensive vehicles. Like cheaper vehicles are better than more expensive vehicles generally because you can slot them into your curve, and then every creature you play after that can crew it as if it had haste, right? It attacks as that vehicle as if it had haste. And so you feel better taking turn 2 off to play this. And this isn't really taking turn 2 off because even if you're like on the draw or whatever, you just play it. Effectively takes care of their attacker that turn because it flashes in and taps it. And this card is really good.
This also has some ninjutsu applications
too,
right?
Sure, yeah.
Rubaya, you can tap down more stuff. So yeah, just like cheap, efficient, does a lot of little things. Yeah, I like this card.
Is this like a B?
I'd give it a B-, I think.
Okay.
I think it does enough little things and is efficient enough. So yeah. I give it a B-.
All right, sweet.
All right, sweet. B- for high-speed hover bike. So next up, we've got Patchwork Automaton. 2 mana for a construct, an uncommon 1/1 with Ward 2. Okay. Whenever you cast an artifact spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Patchwork Automaton.
I'm kind of in for this. Like,
interesting.
I mean, obviously this is slow or whatever, but I also don't think. I think this is not. I don't see this and go, ooh, this is a reason for me to draft an artifact-focused deck. But I do think if I'm already drafting red-black and I see this, or I'm drafting blue-red and I see this, I am gonna want to take this. You know, at a C+. So I'd probably give this like a synergy C+ grade.
Yeah, I'm always hesitant of cards that don't block very well the turn they come down, which this does not. Just like no. Okay, so one of the things that the set actually, as we were gonna see more creatures, I kind of alluded to this, but I kind of alluded to this earlier. This set really incentivizes blocks because of ninjas, because there's a bunch of like attacking triggers that you want your opponents not to get multiple of, and so I think this card being a 2-drop that doesn't give you the option to block with it, most of the time, if they don't have an X1, that's a decent knock on the card, I would say. So I agree with everything you said. It's like, okay, cool. You can like, little cool little thing that you can slot into your Artifacts Matters deck. Will be, I guess the way I would put this is probably fills more of that fine filler role in the right place rather than a card I'm like, all right, this like, is actually pretty darn good. So I think I would start this like a D+. But
yeah, I'm gonna go Synergy C, which is I think probably closer than it sounds too, but just a bit more optimistic about the card.
Ooh, this next one's cool.
Yeah, Circuit Mender. 3 mana for a 2/3 artifact creature insect. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life, and when it leaves the battlefield, draw a card. It's really interesting that we've seen leaves the battlefield, not dies, so that ninjutsu will trigger this, and picking up I know there's a pick up an enchantment card in green. I don't know if there's pick up artifact cards in black or red, but yeah. I mean, 3 mana 2/3 as a body is whatever. It's serviceable. And a little bit of life, a little bit of card draw. I'm in for this.
Yeah, this is sweet. It's like, so there's Filigree Familiar from Kaladesh, which I think that card was, we ended up being like, it's like cool. And then it ended up being like, okay, it's kind of just like filler or a speed bump. Not that impactful. Honestly, all that often, right? Having to die to draw a card is like, often nice chump block. But this set having an artifact sacrifice theme, also having ninjas, means you're going to actually be able to have agency over when you draw that card a little more often, I would say. And, flashing forward to some red cards, or there's like a red card in particular, I'm thinking that it's like a 5 mana card that buys back an artifact, a 3 cost or less artifact. It's cool with that. There's, like you said, there's a few things that pick up artifacts. I think this card has, it's a good baseline. Like the baseline of Filigree Familiar, which is, for those who don't know, 3 mana version, or 3 mana 2/2 version of this that had to die instead of leave. That card was like, like I said, fine. But when you upgrade it just a bit to be a 2/3 and have that leaves, not die trigger, I think that upgrades the baseline enough and there's synergy with the card. So I'm pretty high in this card. I would probably give it a B.
Yeah, I'm in for B on Circuit Mender as well.
Sweet. All right, next up, we've got Rato Sentinel. 3 mana, 3/3 Defender. When it enters the battlefield, target player mills 3 cards. It has an activated ability 3. Put target card from a graveyard on the bottom of its owner's library.
What up, Epitaph Golem?
Yeah, it's like a little spin on Epitaph Golem, which I don't know how much of the self-mill theme is present here, which it's not actually very much, I would say. I don't know. It's 3 mana 3/3 Defender is not the worst when you potentially have stuff that you can recur from your grave or things that you want in your graveyard. I don't love it though. Like the activated ability, what you really want to do with these kind of cards, of course, is like stack your deck in some way where you're getting to the point where you're like you've milled enough, or the game's gone on long enough where you're stacking your deck, you're paying 3 mana, and you're like stacking the best cards in the best order possible. That's the dream with this card, right? But I don't think. I mean, I know we haven't played the set. We haven't. I'm low context here, but I don't think this set really supports. It has the infrastructure for that kind of strategy, just based on the cards. So we'll have to see. I'm sure this is Sam Black card where he loves doing this kind of stuff. But I don't think I'm gonna start high on this as like this is a thing I want to be doing kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna start this at a D. I mean, I will definitely be playing and stacking my deck at some point in the format, but that is more of a this is definitely a do as I say, not as I do grading situation here.
Yep.
All right, next up we have Runaway Trashbot. This is 3 mana for an 0/4 construct with Trample. Runaway Trashbot gets +1/+0 for each artifact and or enchantment card in your graveyard.
Yeah, so comes down, blocks fairly well on turn 3. Doesn't threaten to eat anything as an 0/4 most likely. Probably isn't going to be a 1/4 or 2/4 at that point, but there's enough artifacts and enchantments in the set that I think this thing's just gonna grow at a reasonable pace over the course of the game to be like 3/4 trample and eventually 4/4 trample for 3. I think it's fine. I don't think it's exciting or anything, but I would probably give this about a C.
Yeah, I think C seems totally fair. Like on curve, this is gonna be an 0/4. Not hard to imagine it being a 1/4. And then as it scales with the game reasonably well, I don't quite have a sense of, maybe in red-black, this is like easier to make it happen. Like this is easier to make work or make large because of the sacrifice theme or whatever. I don't know. But I think there's enough support for this for it to be good. So yeah, C seems good.
Sweet. All right. C for another Trashbot then.
What's next?
We got Tuashi Guidebot. So this is 4 mana for a 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you put a 1/1 counter on target creature you control. 4 tap, draw a card. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each modified creature you control. So it's gonna already be 3 mana for the most part because you're putting a counter on something. And then if you can get this to 2 mana, I don't know. That's kind of appealing, but it does have kind of a clunky slow factor to it.
This card is really bad.
You think so?
I think this card's really bad. Like
I think this is an interesting one.
It's interesting, but that doesn't mean it's good.
Well, I mean, it's interesting as far as a card evaluation perspective goes.
So, the modification theme exists in an aggressive deck, right?
Yeah.
If the red-green signpost is pointing to us what red-green wants to do, it's give creatures haste and +1/+1 counters. So that doesn't get me excited for the stats on this card. And then even if the stats were fine or whatever, does your modified deck want to spend mana and time drawing extra cards? No.
Yep.
I think this, again, is this a card that I'm going to put in my deck at some point? Actually, I'm not even sure that I will stoop to putting this card. It's just the stats are so bad for 4 mana.
No, I'm in agreement with you here.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go low on it as well.
Yeah, I'm giving this a D-.
There was a twinkle in my eye that was like, but no, you definitely dream crushed me there.
Yeah.
So
last up at uncommon, we've got Walking Skyscraper, 8 mana for an 8/8 artifact construct with Trample. It has hexproof as long as it's untapped, and it costs 1 less to cast for each modified creature you control.
Okay. Well, hexproof is a word that a lot of people are scared of and drawn to. So that's something to definitely note about this card. 8 mana, 8/8 that probably costs like 6, I would say, most of the time on average, maybe even a little bit less. That's pretty nice. So I guess the comparison to make here is like Gate Colossus, right, from RNA, for anybody who's played with that, and that was a pretty good card. Very very similar card. Just giant thing that was cheaper for each gate you controlled. I think this card is pretty good.
Yeah, I think this is a fine. I honestly don't think it would have been that crazy for this to be a common though, because I think only some decks want it, and I don't know if I don't know, in your stupid modified deck where the boards we're talking about where this is going to be super cheap are boards where you have a lot of stuff on them that isn't dying, and so that's already a good situation for you. But I think this is a 6 mana 8/8 trample is not unreasonable for modified decks, and I think and for other decks too with reconfigure, etc. That I think this is a huge threat.
If you can get this to cost 6, it's really, really good. If you can get it to cost 7, it's still fine.
Yeah, this card. I mean, yeah. How highly do you take it?
Yeah, I can't imagine like extremely highly, but honestly, it might end up just being really, really good, right? Like, it might
that's true.
Like, there's a bunch of like little like trinkety things that instantly put counters, and there's like reconfigure cards. That this might even, Gate Colossus ended up being a high pick, like quite a high pick in that moment, even if you weren't full on gate stuff, right? Because like what I was just saying about this card, when you can cost 6, it's pretty good. I'm gonna start high on this one, honestly. I think we've seen enough like little trinkety stuff just in colorless artifacts, and there's more stuff as we go forward and colored stuff that modifies itself, right? That I think this could cost 5 sometimes even, and that's not crazy.
On curve?
Yeah, and the nice thing too is one of the knocks against expensive creatures is you play it, your opponent bounces it, or you play it, your opponent removes it, and it's like, all right, well, that's a big tempo hit, right? Not happening with this card. Hexproof, as long as it's untapped, means that's just not happening.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think I'm gonna go like B- on this one.
Yeah. All right. I'll join you at B-. I like it. I like it. That doesn't seem too hot takey to me.
Nice.
Honestly, that seems like we're being a little conservative there. I could see it going B.
Yeah, me too.
B+.
I think so too.
All right. Yeah. What's our first rare here?
Okay, so Eater of Virtue is a 1-mana legendary artifact equipment. It's got equip 1, and it says whenever a equipped creature dies, you exile it. It also says equipped creature gets +2/+0. As long as a card exiled with Eater of Virtue has flying, equipped creature has flying. The same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Haste, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Protection, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. So it's got that word soup of all the abilities for the most part. So let's just dissect this card essentially. 1-mana equipment that equips for 1 gives +2/+0. That's the gold standard that we often relate a lot of equipment to. That's Bone Splitter, right? From way long time ago. We always go, oh, that card is really good because it makes all of your creatures trade up, makes all of your creatures relevant, makes your small 1-drops relevant, and it's so cheap to move around. You can attack and then move it onto a blocker. That's quite good. So just at a baseline, I think Bone Splitter would probably be like a C or a C+. The ability of exiling it when it dies is a bit of a downside, but the fact that if you have like a flyer die, your things have flying, that's a huge upside. Same with all any of these abilities actually. If you got one ability on this thing, it's quite powerful because moving that ability
already great. +2/+0 for 1 is already great.
Exactly. Moving that around anywhere, like moving that keyword around anywhere is really, really powerful. Now, I don't think it's going to be that easy to get that ability, honestly, because your opponent's just not going to be wanting to trade. They'll just be like, all right, I'll take some damage, which is a fine exchange for you. Don't get
they don't get to do that for very long before they're dead.
That's good. But my point is the ability thing isn't going to come up. But like you said, that baseline is good. This card's quite good.
But also imagine, like, the ridiculous thing is, okay, so you attack with a thing, and they're like, I can't block that. I'll let it through. And then you go, cool, move this to a good blocker, or move this to a creature that has an ability word on blocks. And they go, well, I guess I don't really want to attack into that either. Like, this card's ridiculous. Someone said, do you take this over a good removal? I would.
Yeah, I think the fact that it's colorless and it's like such a good utility card.
I'm going to go B+ on Eater of Virtue.
I'm gonna go give it a B- probably, but yeah, I think it's quite good.
Mech Titan Core is next. 2 mana for 2/4 vehicle with crew 2, and it has an ability 5 exile Mech Titan Core and 4 other artifact creatures and or vehicles you control. Create Mech Titan, a legendary 10/10 construct artifact creature token with flying, vigilance, trample, lifelink, and haste that's all colors. When that token leaves the battlefield, return all cards exiled with Mech Titan Core except Mech Titan Core to the battlefield, tapped under their owner's control.
Oh, baby. So that's what you call a payoff.
Yeah.
So how easy is it to get this payoff? Well, let's actually start with the baseline vanilla test for this vehicle, right? 2 mana, crew 2, 2/4. That's not good. That is just
no.
You're adding 2 toughness to your
it's +0/+2.
Yeah, if that creature has 2 toughness, right? So let's like 4 other artifact creatures and or vehicles you control. Well, the vehicles will be tough, but artifact creatures, that's not that hard. Like we've seen a bunch of artifact creatures, and there are also colored artifact creatures. So that is we're gonna see more artifact creatures as we go on. I don't know.
They're not just colorless. Yeah, I think this seems like a cool build around. Like, this isn't going every deck.
No, certainly not. It's not just gonna be like throw this in your random like white green deck. I mean, it's awful in white green, I would assume, because that's the enchantment deck. But like, put it in a red blue deck, put it in a black red deck. I don't think it takes that much for this card to go off, right? Just like five this plus 4 other things is not that many things.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it is a lot of things. 4 things that are not dead.
Yeah.
It's a lot of things. I think this is definitely a build around. We haven't given that grade out much, but I definitely think you have to like make concessions in the draft towards this if you want to, but it's definitely worth doing. So I don't know, build around B, I think.
Yeah, maybe I'm a bit high on it. Chat. Everybody in chat seems to be like, this seems impossible. I don't think it's impossible. Maybe I'm talking up a little bit. The payoff is just so good, though. You get just like this gigantic thing that, I mean, mind you, it doesn't have protection or anything, right? It can just die, but it just nugs them for 5 or for 10 lifelink right away.
Yeah.
Right. I don't know. I don't think it's that. I think it's going to be a lot easier than people think to get 4 artifacts on the battlefield.
Right. Well, if people are saying it's nearly impossible, I definitely think it's more than that. I definitely think it's going to be possible, but I just think you got to do some work for it. I'm going to go build around B.
Yeah, okay, solid. I'd give it, probably the same grade.
Okay.
All right, up next, we've got a Reckoner Bankbuster. 2 mana for a 4/4 Crew 3 vehicle. Reckoner Bankbuster enters the battlefield with 3 charge counters on it. 2, tap, remove a charge counter from Reckoner Bankbuster, draw a card. Then, if there are no charge counters on the Bankbuster, you create a treasure token and a 1/1 colorless pilot token with this creature's crew's vehicles as though its power were 2 greater. So it's that, pilot token.
The pilot, okay, yeah. And this has a crew cost of 3.
Yeah, so 2 mana, 4/4 crew 3. That is not great, but also not bad, right? It's not like too rough. You're giving +1/+1 to your 3 power creature, essentially. Which, you could have a 3/2 on turn 3. That's not bad, being able to, like, turn... Actually, that's pretty good, right? Being able to go...
If the format is fast, as you are thinking it is, this card, and fast and slow are not particularly useful ways to describe limited formats.
Yeah.
But this is, if you get to draw 3 cards off this and what you're left with is a 4/4,
yeah,
that's really good.
Yep.
The question is, do you have the time to do that?
Yeah, I think this card's quite good. So, again, going back to the scenario where you're, play it on 2, attack with it on 3, that's pretty darn good, right? You just have to have a 3-power creature to crew, and then if you can't, you probably do the next turn, and then maybe you draw a card off of it the turn after or something like that as you play a 2-drop or something. So this card's got a lot of modality, and yes, like you said, it is a lot of value in one card.
Yeah, so some folks making comparisons to Maze Mind Tome or Treasure Map. Treasure Map was only 1 mana. Maze Mind Tome, you could tap for 0 mana to scry. It gained you life. With which this turning into a 4/4 does kind of gain you life.
Treasure Map can't attack you.
Yeah.
Or block, right?
I think this card's really good.
I would give this one a B+.
I'm going to go B+ as well. I think this is a really strong card.
Yep.
Next up is Mirror Box. This is 3 mana for an artifact. It says the legend rule doesn't apply to permanents you control. Each legendary creature you control gets +1/+1, and each non-token creature you control gets +1/+1 for each other creature you control with the same name as that creature. This is not a limited card.
Yeah, this is not a limited card. This is I don't want to.
This is an F.
Format sport. Yeah, some casual format. we'll give a quick F and move on.
Some casual format that's killing Magic. Is that what you mean?
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, us limited players are really feeling the pain from those casual players taking up the market share.
For sure.
Next up, we've got Surge Hacker Mech. This is a 4 mana 5/5 vehicle. It's got crew 4. Okay, so that's where we're getting to that's a lot. So 4 mana 5/5 crew 4. It's got Menace. Okay, that's pretty good too. When Surge Hacker Mech enters the battlefield, it deals damage equal to twice the number of vehicles you control to target creature or planeswalker an opponent controls. Okay, so this comes in and it deals 2 damage by itself, right? So it's like a 4 mana 4 mana vehicle. It's gonna shock something, right? And then you can probably crew it with your 2-drop and your 3-drop as a blocker or an attacker the next turn. I think that shock makes up for a lot of the clunkiness of the crew 4 here.
It doesn't make it great, but I think it does make up for it. Yeah.
Yeah, it does make it so that it's better than anything else with crew 4. It's clunky, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like this card a decent amount. I think it's probably the worst of the rare vehicles we've seen here, but still pretty darn solid. And like, okay, so imagine this. You know, you play this on turn 4, you kill their 2-drop, and you know your opponent may or may not be able to attack into this. Maybe you can block. You know, you can crew it to block. Maybe you don't have enough creatures. But then the next turn, you're almost certainly gonna have enough creatures. Then you hit them with a 5/5 menace, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty beefy. And sometimes this kills a bigger thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like sometimes this kills, you know, one more vehicle kills a 4 toughness creature.
Yeah, I mean, you're not like gonna be able to curve, like you're unlikely to be curving a 2-mana or 3-mana vehicle into this, but it's possible. That just means you're not really affecting the board in a meaningful way on those previous turns. Yeah, what grade do you give this?
I think I'd probably give this one like a B-, I would say.
I think I'm in for B- as well.
Cool.
All right, let's move on over to the lands. We've got one here to represent all of the ETB tapped gain lands, but these are, Bloodfell Caves is the one we have here. Enters the battlefield tapped. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 1 life, and it taps for black or red. And we have the full cycle here. All 10 of the color pairs are represented.
So having these at common, and again, I don't think we quite have confirmation.
It's not 1 per pack, right?
I don't think it's 1 per pack. I don't think we have confirmation of that, but I do think it is. If I had to guess, they'd probably put them in this at probably the same rate as they did in Call Time. And so like just the existence of these in the format, like having dual lands, makes splashing so much easier. It's not to the point where you should be like, I'm just splashing all the time, but like you pick up a bomb in Crimson Vow, right? You really have to hope to see an Evolving Wilds or 2, or just like, or else like, you know, we talked about before, destroying your mana base, right? That happens way too often. But these lands being in the format makes it so that like a splash like that for a powerful bomb is a lot more manageable and just will happen more often. So it's mostly when we talk about these cards, it's what they like when we're grading them. It's more about what they do to the format, right? They do enable some amount of 5-color or 4-color shenanigans if you are at a table that allows you to have a lot of them, right? Especially with the, you know, the next land we're going to see produces, you know, a man of any color. So yeah, I think that what we saw in Call Time with, you know, being able to pick up fixing and honestly, it affects the sealed format more than anything. That's something interesting too. Really does make it feel different than the sets we've had in the past, you know, a few months, you know, with AFR and, well, maybe AFR Treasure was a bit different, but, you know, the Innistrad sense we've had, it'll feel a lot different as far as fixing goes.
Yeah. And these are generally like CC plus grade cards. Like you take, like once you know what color pair you're in, you'll value having a few of these that are in your color pair, or, you know, if you, like Alex said, if you're splashing something or you're seeking something, some fixing out for a splash card, then you'll take these appropriately highly.
Sweet. And it looks like, just, you know, for chat's giving us some info here, it looks like the split is the special basic lands, the full art ones, will take up 33% of packs, so I assume these will be in 66% of packs, or, you know, 60 whatever. You know, we'll give or take wherever that percentage point goes. So yeah, good to know.
Okay.
Next up, we've got that card I was just talking about. So this is Uncharted Haven. So this is a land that comes into the battlefield tapped, and you can choose a color, and it taps for any, you know, for that color. So it's very similar to, I mean, it's exactly Shimmerdrift Vale, just not snow, that we saw in Call Time, right? So great fixing tool. It's very similar to the dual lands, better in, you know, decks that, you know, maybe are splashing multiple things, so you can like pick and choose, but just very similar role, I would say.
Yeah, I think this card's great. Another C+ grade.
And worth noting for both these kind of cards, right? You should speculate on them, right? Just like you would with, you know, I would argue Evolving Wilds is a card you should take just like mid pack anyways, have a better mana base. But let's say you're like green blue, right? And you see a blue black dual land in the middle of the pack and nothing, you know, there's fine playables, but nothing exciting. I would generally take the dual land because you never know what you're going to see, right? And especially as we understand the set a bit better, we're going to understand kind of what the more common splashes are, and the more common, like, this deck wants to splash this color for this, you know, hole filling niche, that, you know, card that fills this niche. So that's something to keep in mind. And yeah, you know, Lands are nice picks in limited. That's the big picture here.
First uncommon is Mech Hanger. Taps for colorless. You can tap to add a mana of any color. Spend this mana only to cast a pilot or vehicle spell. And you can pay 3 tap to give target vehicle, or to make target vehicle become an artifact creature until end of turn.
So it takes a lot, to put a colorless land in my deck. And this is quite colorless, but
it's effectively colorless.
It's effectively
like
colorless.
How many vehicles do you think in your most vehicle blue-white synergy deck? Like, let's talk the absolute ceiling of this card, or the potential for this card. 5 vehicles?
And how many of them are going to be colored? Not many.
Not a lot. Like this card feels really bad to me.
So I think the value of it is not the mana fixing. It's the
turn a vehicle into a creature.
Exactly. And even still,
is that worth it?
Unless you've got absolutely nothing to do in the late game, essentially 4 mana is not going to be great. I mean, I guess the way I would put it is the upside you get from a free activation is most likely not worth the impact this has on your mana base, is what the bottom line comes down to, right? I guess the higher the crew cost, the more this has, the more this pulls, right? The more weight this pulls, but at the same time, like, that just all sounds like a recipe for disaster, putting a bunch of high crew cost vehicles in my deck to turn them on with my Mech Hanger. Yeah. I think this is not a card that adds EV to your deck, essentially. I think this is probably an F.
D minus. F is fine by me. Folks are asking, like, do we just count this as a pilot? But that's the reason I asked, how many vehicles do you think you're gonna play? Like, you wouldn't, and that's the max. The maximum I can imagine is like 5 or 6.
And the thing is, so the other thing is, like, there's some thoughts in chat about, you could run this to the 18th land, but then you're not playing your spell. Like, wouldn't you rather 23rd spell? I think you'd rather 23rd spell over 18 land in most, the vast majority of the cases.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. Moving on to our next one here, we've got Roadside Reliquary. So this is another colorless land. 2 tap. This is uncommon, by the way. 2 tap, sack it, draw a card if you control an artifact, and draw a card if you control an enchantment.
Now we're pushing on a colorless land that I would actually be okay with, depending on, the things we're gonna have to ask are, like, what are my source requirements for my color cards in my deck? I assume I'm only 2 colors when I play a colorless land. If I do want to treat this as an 18th land, if I do want to play this as an 18th land in my deck, does my deck support that in a sense of, it has places to put the extra mana, blah, blah, blah. But this is a colorless land that I definitely imagine I'll play.
Yeah, so I would caution against, like, again, one of the things we've touched on quite a few times in this set review is limited mana bases are pretty bad. I would caution against putting this card in your deck as your 17th land. Like you said, this is when I'm more into 18th land, because you've still got to maintain the integrity of your mana base, having, like, enough sources to cast your spells, and cutting out a colorless source in your deck, a colored source in your deck to put this in is a cost, right? So just be aware of that. The more colorless cards you have, the more this is manageable, right? You have less colored pips in your deck, I would say. But be aware of that. It is still a cost. This isn't just free upside. It's good though. It's good. This is definitely one that I'm more into than the other one. So what do you want to give this one?
Go like synergy C on this.
Yeah, I think that's right. That feels right to me. All right, what's up next?
Secluded Courtyard. Enters the battlefield, you choose a creature type. Taps add a colorless mana, and it taps add 1 mana of any color, but spent only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type or activate an ability of a creature or creature card of the chosen type.
How deflated were you, Ethan, when you heard the news that Shrine is not a creature type?
I was bummed, for sure. I was bummed. And also, just like, it's just confusing to me. Like, I like intellectually understand why it's not a creature type, but that just seems like, if I am confused by that, how many Magic players are going to be confused by that,
It's just odd to me that there's just creatures in this set without a creature type. That's a little bit strange. But anyways, this is a very similar space to the Hanger, right? Like, very hard.
We didn't. Unclaimed Territory was in Ixalan, which was a tribal set.
Yes,
and that was an F in Ixalan. Yep. This is an F. Don't put this card in your deck.
Even if you got a heavy warrior deck or a heavy ninja deck, you've still got instants and sorceries in your deck, which this, does not help cast. And
Yeah.
It's not going to, like, the calculus is, it will, in my, my experience with these cards is that they hurt you just way more than they help you.
Here's a fun little story for y'all. So I do for Tournament Grounds was the land from Eldraine that tapped for red, white, or black to cast Knights, but it could only use that color mana to cast Knights, and then it was colorless everywhere else. And I was like, I finally had a deck where I was like, oh, I think I had 4 of the red, white 2-drops in that deck, and I was like, this is finally the spot to play this card. And then I had my opponent at 4, and I drew Slaying Fire, which if you paid red, red, red for, would deal 4 instead of 3. And I looked down on my lands, and I was like, you done played yourself, Ethan.
Yeah.
So don't put this card in your deck, okay? Just don't do it.
Yep. You'll find that, like, maybe 1 out of 500 time when it's right, but,
yeah,
most times you shouldn't. All right, so now we're moving on to our last rare lands. So you've got a cycle of channel lands, which are pretty cool. So these all are legendary lands that come in untapped and tap for whatever color they are, and then they have a channel ability. So the first one we're looking at is Beseiju, who endures all. This is a legendary land, rare. Taps to add a green. Doesn't come in tapped, just like a forest, basically. And then has a channel ability. It's 1 and a green to discard Beseiju, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or non-basic land an opponent controls. Oh, look, another reason not to play secluded courtyard. Yeah, no, not really, because it does have a reparations here for the player who gets the thing destroyed. That player may search their library for a land with a basic land type, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary creature you control. So sort of like Assassin's Trophy-ish for artifacts and enchantments and non-basic lands. This is good, but I would temper your expectations of this card in a few regards. So one, this card's got a little bit of heat on it from Constructed, where I think it will be quite good in older formats. But in Limited, there's a lot of artifact and enchantment targets, right? The problem is hitting one of them early, turn 3, 4, even 5 or 6, is not pure upside. Giving them a land is a real card and early in the game, right? Ramping them is real. So if you want to destroy their vehicle with this card, that is not just pure 1-for-1 exchange. You're 2-for-1ing yourself essentially. Where this is nice, and where honestly comes up more often because you're going to be playing your lands early, is later in the game you hold this, you go, okay, they play a scary vehicle or a saga, I can destroy it. They get a land. Their nth land, isn't going to matter that much. So that's where this card does, is pretty good. It's an upgrade over a basic land, right? It's just like straight upside over a basic land, and unless you draft 2 of them somehow. So it's not like you're upgrading a land slot, which is nice. All that together, I don't think makes for a very high pick. It's a good card, but it feels more like I would take this where I take a dual land more than anything else.
I think a lot higher on these than you are.
Interesting.
It sounds like. I think. Yeah, I mean, this is. When was the last time you didn't make playables, especially in a set that has a lot of colorless cards? Now, I'm not saying like we already talked about the colorless cards that a lot of them are filler, whatever. But like once you know what your colors or color pairs are, I think these are pretty darn high picks because they're free. And they're not, it's not like, I mean, maybe I'm just getting got again. We were high on MDFCs and then we had to come down again. These don't come into play tapped. These just straight up replace lands. And so they're, you don't have to play 18 lands. Like, just play this as a forest. And so it's great. You play when you need your land, you play it. And when you want the effect, you have the effect. Like, I think this is pretty darn good. And I would put them above the dual lands myself.
Yeah, so I maybe am, I don't want to speak for all of the lands that we're going to touch on here, but this one in particular, I think I'm not like that high on.
Sure, that's fair.
Okay, yeah. And all the nice things I could say, like everything you just said, like you upgrade a basic, you're not going to make playable. The other thing too is you have to be careful though, because I think you're just not going to see these cards all that often, because I think people are going to potentially take them a little bit higher.
Not on Arena, right?
Maybe not. That's true.
Like in paper, sure. Like this one specifically, but on Arena. Anyway, I think I'm going to give these an aggressive B- in the sense of once I know, like I'm not taking these pack one, pick one, unless it's a weak pack. Once I know I'm in this color, I'm taking this over a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I think my gut tells me I'm a little bit lower on this.
Probably. Yeah.
Like I'm gonna give Besager here a C.
Yeah, I think I'm probably just gonna give these all a blanket B-, but I think a C is fine.
All right, so we should read the other ones.
Iganjo, Seed of the Empire. So they all have the cost one less to channel if there's a legendary, if you have for each legendary creature you control, so we're not going to read that. So Iganjo, Seed of the Empire is the white one, and his channel for 2 and a white. Discard Seed of the Empire. It deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature.
So this one I'm a little bit more into, like just like giving a decent removal, putting a decent removal spell on your land. I think it's a little bit better than the 2-for-1 removal spell on Besager. That's all. That's the only distinction I want to make. I think this one I'm gonna give like a C+ too.
Yeah, I mean, your point about 2-for-1. I mean, I don't want to belabor these rare lands because who cares? But like your point about 2-for-1, I think is makes sense to me in terms of the developing stages of the game. Mm-hmm. In terms of blowing up an equipment on turn 5, I don't think you're actually 2-for-1ing your opponent. I don't think that's a 2-for-1 not in your favor. And it's also the opportunity cost it's just so low because you're turning your land into a kill a thing that then turns that thing into a land for them. Does that land matter? Probably not.
I wouldn't say no. I mean, there's as much as I think this set's gonna be like kind of aggressive. I think there's a lot of places to put your mana too. There's reconfigure,
sure,
right? Like there's things that you can pick up stuff within Jutsu. I don't know. I think 6th and 7th land are not gonna be irrelevant. Is basically what I'm trying to get at here. Anyway, like you said, we're probably lingering a bit too long on that one. Yeah. But what do you think about Iganjo? Is this one?
This card's great. Yeah, like I said, I think I'm not really differentiating, but I don't think giving this one a C+ versus a B- versus a C. I think exactly. I just my overarching feeling about these lands is my gut says once I know I'm in the color, I'm taking these over most other things.
Yep, that's fair.
Yeah.
Next one up, we've got the blue one in the cycle here. Otawara, Soaring Sky. It's the blue one. It's got 3 in a blue. Discard it. Return target artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. It's got the cost reduction thing for legends. Yeah, bounce spell.
Yes, please.
Yeah, totally fine. I would put this in the C+ camp probably.
Yeah, what are you giving Iganjo as well?
Oh, I would give Iganjo a C+.
C+, okay. Next up, we've got Sokenzen, Crucible of Defiance. This is the red one, and the channel ability is 3 in a red. Discard it. Create 2 1/1 colorless spirit creature tokens. They gain haste until end of turn.
Yeah, not bad. I think I'd also give this one a C+.
Yeah, this is a gas. And what's the black one here?
We got Takanuma, Abandoned Mire. So this one is 4 mana, discard it, mill 3 cards, then return a creature or planeswalker from your graveyard to your hand. It's a little bit of a rebuy on a creature, most likely.
There's the self-mill action.
Yeah, exactly. Very, very small amounts of self-mill.
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's super... this is probably worse than the things that actually interact and affect the board, but I still think super high upside, not very much downside here.
Yeah, chat saying another point is that channel cannot be interacted in the same way as a spell. It's an ability. You can't counter a channel ability unless there's specifically something that says counter an ability. I don't think that changes my evaluation of the card very much, or these cards very much. Like, yeah, very, very minorly can't be countered, but doesn't move the needle all that much.
All right, and there it is. There's artifacts and lands.
Sweet.